All right, let's prep the foam ball. So all the other foam balls that I've got, I've already done the face, the flat face, and then drilled the hole on, except for this one. But this is one, as you can see, I've kind of experimented on this one. It's got some textured ridges on it. I was wrapping some cable, steel cable around it, and it left those ridges. But it'll be good enough to at least demonstrate how to prep the ball. So the first thing we have to do is cut this flat face off of here. The hole is only necessary if you're planning on lighting the eye. But if you're not going to light the eye, you don't have to worry about that. You do need to take this flat face off. Otherwise, if you just put a whole ball in to the paper body, there won't be enough room for the eye, because it's kind of recessed back into the body a little ways. So we've got to make a little bit of room for that. So the way that I'm going to mark this is just using this compass that I've got here. Probably the easiest way to do it. If you don't have a compass, you could maybe get a pin, poke it into the ball, and then have like a piece of string that's measured to length, and tie like a pen or a pencil or something on the end, something to mark it with, and then just carefully run it along with the piece of string pulled tight at that right length. Then that should work as well. But I've got a compass, so I'm going to use that. It's not very precise, but it'll be good enough. So what I want to do is I'm going to measure out how wide it is here, and on the instructions, you want to get between 19 and 20 millimeters. I mean, it's not too critical. There's a little bit of play in the measurements. It doesn't have to be quite exact, but if you're going to err, I would err on the big side. Make this face a little bit bigger in diameter than necessary, because that'll make sure you've got plenty of room. If you go too small, you might run into the stuff that's on the inside. But I'm gonna try and get it as close as I can to about 19 or 20. And yes, this compass does have little markings on here, but I don't really trust them. So I'm just gonna mark out exactly what I want. So you can see I just set the pokey end at 0, and then measure it out to between 19 and 20. It's about 19 right there. But this does, when I there's kind of a hole already here, so I'm just going to use that hole. When I kind of set that down in there, it pushes it out a little ways beyond 19, so I'm good with that. So let's go ahead and rest that in there, and just kind of carefully move that around. Looks like the pencil is going to be just fine. I was wondering if I might have to put a Sharpie or something in there, something a little darker to see, but this pencil is marking it just fine. Try not to push the pokey end of the compass in too deep, because I don't want it to throw the measurement off any more than it already is. But there we go. So that's probably a little hard to see on camera. I'll go over that with a Sharpie or a pen just to kind of make that a little bit darker. I want to be able to see it later as well. Just following the pencil line. I can see it pretty well. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I can see it well enough here. I can follow it. There we go. That's better. Yeah. All right. So the next thing we've got to do is just chop that off. If you've got a power tool, like a bandsaw or something, you can run that through, keep it real steady, cut a nice flat line. If you don't have that, you could use a hand saw. I've got a saw here that I could use. I'd cut through that really easily, but a little harder to make sure that comes out flat and straight doing it by hand, but we'll go ahead and get that cut. go ahead and build the body now. And we're going to start with the back half, these pieces here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and lightly score the bend lines for all these tabs. And then just go around with my really sharp hobby knife with the sharp tip, not the broken tip ones. Keep those for other things. And yeah, go around, cut all those pieces out, and then we'll start building probably from the middle. This will be kind of the middle piece in, so from the bigger to the smaller. And I just run this little tool I've got. It came with a loom, like a little yarn project loom for making knitted caps, and I just found it really useful for all sorts of things. Applying glue, doing this, use it all the time. I'm just kind of moving it along, pressing hard enough to just make the bend easier later, but not so hard that I damage the paper so that the tabs break off. So I've got a marker here that I like to use to color in the tabs, so that once you put it together, if the seams don't match up perfectly, which they rarely do, then you'll see a little bit of white shining through. So it looks a little bit better if you kind of darken these tabs with a marker. Probably even a better idea to do this before you cut it out. So I'm getting a little bit of resistance from those tabs, cut edges on the tabs, making it stick up a little bit. The marker is catching on them. Also put down, getting marker on my cutting mat. There we go. Do the same thing there. And then I also like to do the same thing along these edges so that they don't stand out on the darker components. Just run the marker along and it just stains them nicely. Depending on the darkness of the marker you're doing, if you linger a little too long, the marker can seep through that cut edge and leave little stains. This actually looks pretty good, but sometimes you'll see little stains come in too, so you don't want to linger too long. You just kind of run along it as quick as you like, just enough to take that white edge away. Alright, so there's the first one. So what we're going to do is, we obviously need to shape this. Now this, the body is made up all these, it's a sphere of course, but we've broken it down basically into little sections of cones. So we really don't have to put like a complex bend on this. Sometimes when you're shaping paper, if you want to put kind of like a bowl shape, you have to kind of, I roll it in my hand to give it that bowl shape. But for this, we don't need to do that because it's really only being bent in one direction because it's really just a section of a cone. So it just needs to kind of roll around and match up with that tab there. But I think it's going to be easier to bend, give all of these tabs a little bit of a bend before I roll that up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. There's a couple ways you could do this. I always use a good pair of tweezers for doing my bending. And these tabs are small enough that you can just bend each one individually. Basically just line up the edge of the tweezers right where the bend is going to be, and then just kind of give it a tweak. In this case, I don't have to bend it too far because the next piece down is really just kind of at a slight angle. So I just want to give it a little bit of a bend to help it, when I go to assemble those later, they're already going to be kind of pointed in the right direction. So you can do that with individual tabs. If you have longer tabs like this one here, where the bend edge is longer than the tweezers themselves, usually what I'll do is I'll use the edge of my ruler and line up the bend on the edge of the ruler, and then just kind of use the back of the tweezers to push down, start that bend, and then I'll kind of run it along that edge, push it to kind of give it a crease on that bend. That pushes it down. Now, typically with parts like this where you're rolling circles, that does make this so that instead of having a nice circular edge, it gives it kind of a peak like that, which doesn't always look great. But by the time you get them all together, the ones that's next to it's going to support this one, and the one that's next to that's going to support that one. So it'll be more or less spherical by the time we get done, so I'm not too worried about this one. But you also I do also worry about this edge, since this flap of paper is, this side of the paper is sitting on top of that flap that is connected to this side of the paper. There's going to be an edge there where this side of the paper is higher than this side of the paper. And if you want it to kind of be smooth across, you kind of have to put bend the tab on the end of this. You bend it down and then kind of bend it back out. So there's a bit, it dips down. So when it sits into the dip, the top of this piece is flush with the top of that piece. So hopefully that makes sense. So what I usually do is then I'll bend this tab back the other way. So I'll flip it over, and then I don't do it on the same bend line because that just undoes the bend we just did. I set it back inward a little bit so that there's essentially another bend line that's just ahead of that. And then I'll run my tweezers to kind of bend that back. So now I've got essentially two bend lines, a bend down and then a bend up that brings it back parallel. And that leaves, probably hard to see on video, but again, it does that thing where the top of the paper is up here and then it steps down and then the tab is there. So when this piece of paper wraps around and folds on top, they're more or less flush. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and finish bending the rest of these. If this was all in a straight line, I could just line it up on my ruler here, kind of put it against the table and bend them all at once, but since this is curved, that's not really an option. So I'm just going to have to go through and bend each one in. Just get those lined up as good as I can. There we go. Put some pressure on it. Just using this Aleene's clear gel tacky glue. I like using this for my paper models, but if I need a bond that has a lot of strength, I'll tend to use super glue. For something like this, for like a ring with such a small glue area, this is where I would tend to use the super glue for that. But once this is all said and done, there's going to be a lot of bond surface between the different parts. So that'll definitely make up for the lack of strength of this one individual. Keep shifting. See if I can get that lined up a little better. It's spreading apart. There we go. That'd be good enough for now. I can redo that later if it's not strong enough. There we go. There's our first. Now this is going to be the back, so it goes that way. There's a little bit of extra play built into this, right? I didn't design this paper model to be right up against the foam ball, because it doesn't really need to be. The ball is there for support. So when you put the nodes on, you've got something to push against. It's not going to crush the sphere inward. And so if there's a little bit of a gap, that's okay. Gives us some wiggle room for later. So, okay, that looks good. We'll set that aside, move on to the next one. Now for parts that have a tighter curvature, these ones I've just been kind of rolling by hand. But as I get to these smaller pieces, they have a tighter curvature. And I think it's going to be a little bit easier. What I'll typically do is I'll find something that's cylindrical shaped, like a paintbrush or a pencil, and kind of hold it against my hand. And I point the pencil, in this case for a conical shape, I point the pencil towards the center of the circle, and I keep it pointed towards the center, and I just kind of roll it around. In this case, it's making really tight curvature, way more than I need. So I'll have to back off the pressure a little bit on that. I'm just applying a little bit of pressure and follow all the way through. Yeah, I started out a little too tight there, but that's going to make it a little bit easier to glue. Now instead of it trying to so hard to force itself apart, it's going to hold its shape much easier. found the best way to do something like this is, since I want these two edges to line up on the back or on the bottom, then I'll go ahead and glue the couple tabs that are right there on either side of that line to the second piece, and then try to get it as close as I can so it looks like it's centered just right. And I'll glue two tabs on the opposite side, and then once those are good, then I'll do the same, kind of glue two tabs on each quarter, and then that should pretty much lock in the shape. And then I can go around and kind of fold these down a little bit, add some glue, and work my way around filling that in.